Hey guys, tonight we step back into a world where winter wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a battle for survival. Picture this. You're huddled in a stone cottage as howling winds tear through the countryside outside. Snow piles against your door like nature's own siege weapon. Your breath fogs in the air even indoors, and the only thing standing between you and a frozen death is the ingenuity of medieval builders who somehow figured out how to create warmth in a world without central heating or modern insulation. So before you get comfortable in your heated home, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what temperature it is outside. It's always fascinating to see how we take modern comfort for granted. Now, dim the lights, maybe grab a warm blanket, and let's journey together into the freezing medieval world where survival meant more than just shelter. It meant mastering the art of staying alive when winter could kill you in your sleep. You wake up in the 13th century England. The year is 1278. And outside your shuttered window, frost has painted intricate patterns on every surface it can reach. But here's what's remarkable. Despite having no furnaces, no electric heaters, no modern insulation, you're not dead. In fact, you're reasonably warm. How is this possible? The answer lies in centuries of trial and error, of families passing down building secrets like treasured recipes. Medieval people weren't primitive. They were ingenious. They had to be. When failure meant your children freezing to death in their beds, you learned to build homes that could wrestle warmth from the coldest months. Let's start with the foundation of medieval winter survival, the hearth. But this wasn't just any fireplace. This was an engineering marvel disguised as a simple stone structure. Medieval builders understood something that many modern people have forgotten. Heat isn't just about making fire. It's about capturing fire, controlling fire, and making every flame count for hours after it dies. The central hearth dominated medieval homes, not because people were obsessed with fire, but because they understood thermal mass. These weren't the decorative fireplaces we see today. They were massive stone constructions that could weigh several tons. The stones would absorb heat during the day when fires burned brightest, then slowly release that warmth throughout the long winter nights. But here's where it gets clever. Medieval builders didn't just pile stones together and hope for the best. They carefully selected specific types of stone based on their heat retention properties. Limestone and sandstone were prized not for their beauty, but for their ability to hold warmth. Some builders even incorporated clay bricks that had been fired in specific ways to maximize their thermal capacity. The positioning of these hearths was calculated with mathematical precision that would impress modern engineers. They placed them at the exact center of the main living space, ensuring heat could radiate in every direction. The chimney wasn't just a way to remove smoke. It was a heat distribution system that channeled warm air through stone passages that ran beneath floors and behind walls. Medieval families gathered around these hearths not just for warmth, but because the entire social structure of winter survival revolved around this single source of heat. Children slept closest to the fire. Elders got the warmest spots. Food was prepared, clothes were dried, and stories were told, all within the heat radius of this carefully engineered stone giant. Now, let's talk about something that sounds almost magical. Medieval builders discovered how to make walls breathe. Not literally, of course, but they understood that the key to staying warm wasn't just keeping cold out. It was managing moisture while maintaining insulation. The walls of surviving medieval homes reveal construction techniques that seem almost impossible without modern tools. They used a method called wattle and daub, which sounds primitive until you understand the science behind it. Wattle was a framework of woven wooden strips, usually made from flexible branches like willow or hazel. But the daub was where the real innovation happened. This wasn't just mud slapped onto wood. Medieval builders created specific mixtures that varied by region and climate. They combined clay, sand, animal dung, chopped straw, and sometimes even animal hair into a paste that, when dried, created an insulating layer that was both waterproof and breathable. The animal dung wasn't added randomly. It contained natural binding agents that made the mixture stronger and more flexible as temperatures changed. Some regions added crushed limestone to their daub mixture, creating a primitive form of concrete that could withstand decades of freeze-thaw cycles. Others incorporated ash from specific types of wood, which added natural pest deterrents and improved the mixture's resistance to moisture. But here's what's truly remarkable. These walls were designed to expand and contract with temperature changes without cracking. Medieval builders understood that rigid walls would fail in harsh winters, so they created flexible barriers that could bend with the weather while maintaining their insulating properties. The thickness of these walls varied dramatically based on local climate conditions. In the coldest regions of northern Europe, walls could be 3 feet thick or more. But it wasn't just thickness that mattered. It was the layering system. Multiple layers of different materials, each serving a specific purpose in the battle against winter cold. Let's move up to something that might surprise you. Medieval roofs were marvels of engineering that had to solve multiple problems simultaneously. They had to shed water and snow, provide insulation, and resist the kind of winds that could tear apart poorly constructed buildings. Thatching was the most common roofing material, but medieval thatchers weren't just piling straw on top of wooden frames. They were creating complex systems that could last for decades while providing exceptional insulation. The thatch wasn't random straw. It was carefully selected wheat straw, reed, or other materials that had been harvested at specific times of year to maximize their durability and insulating properties. The layering of thatch followed precise patterns that had been refined over generations. The bottom layer was laid at specific angles to shed water. The middle layers provided insulation. The top layer was designed to resist wind and protect everything underneath. Some thatchers incorporated aromatic herbs between layers, not for scent, but because these herbs contained natural oils that repelled insects and prevented rot. The thickness of these thatched roofs was extraordinary. In the coldest climates, roofs could be 4 feet thick or more. This created an insulation barrier that was remarkably effective at keeping heat inside homes. Snow that accumulated on top actually added another layer of insulation, creating what was essentially a natural igloo effect. But thatching required constant maintenance and skilled craftsmen who understood the local climate. Different regions developed different techniques based on their specific weather patterns. Coastal areas used different materials and layering patterns than inland regions. Mountain communities developed techniques for dealing with heavy snow loads that would have collapsed roofs designed for gentler climates. Now here's something that reveals just how sophisticated medieval builders really were. They understood the concept of thermal bridging centuries before modern scientists gave it a name. They knew that materials like metal and stone could conduct cold directly through walls, creating cold spots that could make entire rooms uncomfortable. Medieval builders developed techniques to break these thermal bridges using organic material that were natural insulators. They wrapped metal structural elements in straw or wool before incorporating them into walls. They used wooden pegs instead of metal nails wherever possible. They even developed specialized mortars that contained organic materials to reduce the thermal conductivity of stone joints. The windows of medieval homes tell their own story of winter survival. Glass was expensive and rare, so most homes used alternative methods to keep cold out while still allowing some light inside. Oiled parchment, scraped thin animal membranes, and even sheets of ice were used as window coverings in different regions and circumstances. But the real innovation was in window design itself. Medieval builders created deep window wells with multiple barriers. The outer barrier might be wooden shutters. The inner barrier could be oiled cloth or parchment. Between these barriers, they sometimes created air pockets that served as additional insulation. Some builders even installed what were essentially primitive double-pane systems, using multiple layers of different materials. The size and placement of windows was calculated based on solar heating principles that wouldn't be formally understood until much later. South-facing windows were larger to capture winter sunlight. North-facing windows were smaller or sometimes eliminated entirely to prevent heat loss. East and west-facing windows were positioned to capture morning and evening sun while minimizing exposure to prevailing winter winds. Medieval people understood that winter survival wasn't just about individual homes. It was about community planning that could help entire villages survive the coldest months. They built homes close together, creating windbreaks and shared heat sources. They positioned buildings to take advantage of natural landscape features that provided protection from prevailing winds. Some communities developed shared heating systems where multiple homes connected to communal ovens or furnaces. These systems required cooperation and planning that extended far beyond individual family units. They created networks of underground passages that could distribute heat between buildings, essentially creating medieval district heating systems. The sophistication of these community heating networks varied dramatically by region, but some were remarkably advanced. Archaeological evidence suggests that some medieval communities created heated walkways between buildings, allowing people to move around during winter storms without exposing themselves to deadly cold. Let's venture inside one of these medieval homes on a particularly brutal winter night. You push open a heavy wooden door, and immediately you're struck by something unexpected. The air isn't just warm, it's layered with different temperatures, like stepping into a carefully orchestrated thermal landscape that medieval families had learned to navigate with precision. The floor beneath your feet tells its own story of winter ingenuity. These weren't the cold stone floors you might imagine. Medieval builders developed flooring systems that were specifically designed to retain and distribute heat. They laid stones in patterns that created thermal channels, allowing warm air from the hearth to circulate beneath your feet before rising to heat the entire room. But here's where it gets fascinating. They didn't stop at stone. Many medieval homes incorporated what we might call the first underfloor heating systems. They created hollow spaces beneath floors where warm air could circulate, turning the entire floor into a giant radiator. Some builders even channeled hot water from cooking fires through these spaces, creating heated floors that could keep families warm long after the main fire died down. The truly clever part was how they managed different temperature zones within a single room. The area closest to the hearth was for daily activities. The middle zones were for children and family gatherings. The cooler areas near walls were used for storage of items that needed to stay cold. Medieval families didn't fight against the temperature variations in their homes. They embraced them, creating functional spaces based on thermal geography. Medieval bedrooms reveal perhaps the most ingenious winter survival techniques of all. Forget everything you think you know about medieval beds. These weren't simple wooden frames with straw mattresses. They were sophisticated heating systems disguised as furniture. The bed itself was often built like a room within a room. Heavy curtains surrounded the sleeping area, creating a microclimate that could be 20 degrees warmer than the rest of the house. These weren't decorative curtains. They were carefully woven barriers designed to trap body heat and create a pocket of warm air around sleeping bodies. But the real innovation was beneath the mattress. Medieval beds often incorporated heated stones that had been warmed by the fire and then wrapped in cloth. These stones could provide warmth for hours, essentially creating personal heating systems for each sleeper. Some beds even had chambers beneath the mattress where small fires could be maintained safely throughout the night. The mattresses themselves were engineering marvels. They weren't just stuffed with straw. Medieval people understood that different materials provided different types of insulation. They layered feathers for softness, wool for warmth, retention-matic herbs for pest control, and aero. Some mattresses incorporated heated sand or grain that could retain warmth from the hearth and slowly release it throughout the night. Medieval families developed sleeping techniques that maximized shared body heat. Children slept between adults. Multiple layers of wool blankets were arranged in specific orders to create thermal barriers. Some families even slept with their animals, not out of primitive necessity, but because they understood that animal body heat could mean the difference between survival and death on the coldest nights. Now let's talk about something that might sound almost impossible. Medieval builders figured out how to heat water without modern plumbing systems. and they used this heated water as a sophisticated home heating network. They created systems of clay pipes that could carry heated water from cooking fires to different parts of the house. These pipes were often embedded in walls or run beneath floors, distributing warmth throughout the entire structure. The pipes themselves were made from specially fired clay that could withstand temperature changes without cracking. Some medieval homes incorporated what were essentially hot water radiators made from large clay vessels that could be filled with heated water and placed strategically around living spaces. These vessels were often decorated and served double duty as both heating systems and household ornaments. The most advanced medieval heating systems included circulation pumps made from leather and wood that could move heated water through networks of pipes. These systems required constant maintenance and skilled operators, but they could heat large homes with remarkable efficiency. Medieval kitchens were the thermal heart of winter survival, but they weren't just places where food was prepared. They were carefully designed heat generation and distribution centers that kept entire families alive during the coldest months. The cooking fires were built using techniques that maximized heat output while minimizing fuel consumption. Medieval people understood that different types of wood burned at different temperatures and for different durations. They carefully selected and seasoned wood to create fire that could burn efficiently for hours while producing maximum heat. But here's what's remarkable. Medieval kitchens incorporated heat recovery systems that captured waste heat from cooking fires and redirected it to other parts of the house. They built chimney systems that had multiple chambers, allowing heat that would normally escape to be captured and used for warming other rooms. Some medieval kitchens included bread ovens that were designed to continue radiating heat long after baking was finished. These ovens were built with thick stone walls that could absorb heat during cooking and then slowly release it for hours afterward, essentially turning the kitchen into a giant radiator. The positioning of kitchens within medieval homes was calculated to maximize their heating potential. They were often placed at the center of the house so that heat from cooking could radiate in all directions. The chimney systems were designed to channel warm air through passages that heated multiple rooms before the heat finally escaped outside. Medieval people also understood food preservation techniques that worked with their heating systems. They used the consistent low heat from cooling ovens to dry foods, smoke meats, and prepare preserved foods that could sustain families when it was too dangerous to leave the house during winter storms. Let's explore something that reveals the true sophistication of medieval winter survival. They developed clothing and textile systems that worked in harmony with their heated homes to create complete thermal management systems. Medieval clothing wasn't just about covering the body. It was about creating layered insulation systems that could be adjusted based on the temperature zones within their homes. They understood that staying warm meant managing moisture as well as temperature, so they developed fabrics that could wick moisture away from the body while maintaining insulation. The wool used in medieval clothing was processed using techniques that maximized its insulating properties. They understood that different parts of the sheep produced wool with different characteristics. They selected and processed wool specifically for thermal performance, creating garments that were remarkably effective at retaining body heat. Medieval families also developed indoor textile systems that worked as part of their home heating strategies. They hung tapestries and heavy cloth panels that could be adjusted to direct heat flow within rooms. These weren't just decorative elements. They were functional parts of sophisticated thermal management systems. Some medieval homes incorporated what were essentially textile-based heating systems, where cloth panels could be heated near fires and then positioned to radiate warmth in specific directions. These systems allowed families to direct heat precisely where it was needed most, maximizing the efficiency of their fuel consumption. The integration of clothing, textiles, and home heating systems reveals just how completely medieval people understood thermal management. They didn't just build warm houses and wear warm clothes. They created complete environmental systems where every element worked together to maintain survival temperatures during the deadliest winter conditions. But perhaps the most ingenious aspect of medieval winter survival was how they managed light and darkness during those long winter months when daylight barely existed. You have to understand, these weren't just practical concerns. When winter nights stretched for 16 hours or more, the psychological battle against darkness became as important as the physical battle against cold. Medieval builders developed sophisticated lighting systems that served double duty as heating sources. They didn't just burn candles randomly. They created strategic lighting networks that could illuminate spaces while adding precious heat to their thermal management systems. The placement of every light source was calculated to maximize both illumination and warmth distribution. Oil lamps were positioned in alcoves carved specifically into walls, creating focused heat sources that could warm small areas while providing light for essential tasks. These alcoves were often lined with reflective materials like polished metal or white stone that could amplify both light and heat, essentially turning each lamp into a miniature heating and lighting system. But here's where medieval ingenuity really shows. They developed what we might call the first task lighting systems, positioning oil lamps and candles in configurations that could heat specific work areas while providing adequate light for detailed activities like sewing, food preparation, or craft work that kept families productive during winter confinement. The candles themselves were engineering achievements. Medieval candle makers understood that different waxes and fats burned at different temperatures and for different durations. They created candles specifically designed for heating efficiency using animal fats that would burn hot and long while producing maximum light output. Some medieval homes incorporated mirror systems made from polished metal that could reflect and amplify candlelight, creating the illusion of more light sources while directing heat in specific directions. These systems required skilled metalworkers who understood both optics and thermodynamics. Now let's examine something that might surprise you about medieval winter survival. They developed remarkably sophisticated food storage and preparation systems that worked in harmony with their heating systems to ensure families could survive months of winter isolation. Medieval root cellars weren't just holes in the ground. They were carefully engineered climate control systems that could maintain specific temperatures year-round. They understood that different foods required different storage temperatures, so they created cellars with multiple chambers that could maintain various temperature zones simultaneously. The positioning of these cellars relative to house heating systems was calculated with precision. They placed them close enough to benefit from residual heat from house fires, but far enough away to prevent spoilage from excessive warmth. Some cellars even incorporated air circulation systems that could channel cool air from outside while maintaining stable internal temperatures. Medieval families developed preservation techniques that took advantage of their controlled indoor climates. They used the consistent low heat from their heating systems to create controlled drying environments for meats, vegetables, and grains. These weren't random processes. They were carefully managed systems that could preserve foods for months while maintaining nutritional value. The integration of food storage and heating systems reveals sophisticated understanding of thermal management. Medieval builders created spaces where residual heat from cooking fires could be used to maintain optimal storage temperatures for different types of preserved foods, essentially creating the first climate-controlled pantries. Medieval people also understood fermentation processes that worked with their heating systems to create preserved foods that could sustain families through winter. They used controlled heat from their fires to manage fermentation temperatures, creating foods like sauerkraut, preserved meats, and fermented dairy products that provided essential nutrition during months when fresh food was impossible to obtain. Let's venture into something that reveals the true complexity of medieval winter survival. They developed water management systems that prevented freezing while providing essential water supplies throughout the coldest months. Medieval builders understood that water management wasn't just about having enough to drink. It was about preventing their water supplies from becoming deadly ice blocks that could destroy their carefully constructed survival systems. They developed techniques for keeping water liquid even in temperatures that would freeze exposed water solid. They built water storage systems that took advantage of thermal mass from their heating systems. Water containers were positioned near heating sources but protected from direct heat that could cause evaporation. Some systems incorporated insulation techniques using organic materials that could maintain water temperature just above freezing. Medieval communities developed shared water heating systems where multiple families could benefit from communal heated water sources. These systems required cooperation and planning, but they allowed communities to maintain liquid water supplies even during the most brutal winter conditions. The truly remarkable aspect was how they integrated water heating with their home heating systems. They created networks where water used for cooking and cleaning could be heated using the same fires that warmed their homes, maximizing fuel efficiency while ensuring families had access to heated water for essential daily activities. Some medieval water systems incorporated what were essentially the first hot water storage tanks, using large clay vessels that could store heated water and slowly release it as needed. These systems allowed families to have access to warm water hours after fires had died down, providing comfort and essential hygiene capabilities during winter confinement. Medieval builders also developed drainage systems that prevented water from freezing in ways that could damage their homes. They understood that standing water could freeze and expand, cracking foundations and walls. So they created sophisticated drainage networks that moved water away from structures while preventing ice formation that could threaten their winter shelters. Now, let's explore something that shows just how completely medieval people understood winter survival psychology. They developed indoor activity systems that helped families maintain mental health during months of confinement in small spaces. Medieval homes weren't just designed for physical survival. They were designed to support the social and psychological needs of families who might be trapped together for months without the ability to leave their homes safely. They created interior spaces that could accommodate different activities and social arrangements. The layout of medieval homes reflected sophisticated understanding of social dynamics during winter confinement. They created spaces where families could gather together for shared activities, but also areas where individuals could retreat for privacy when tensions arose from too much togetherness. Medieval families developed crafting and production activities that could be performed indoors during winter months. These weren't just ways to pass time. They were essential economic activities that allowed families to create goods they could trade when winter ended, ensuring they had resources for the following year. The positioning of work areas within medieval homes was calculated to take advantage of available light and heat, while accommodating the tools and materials needed for winter production activities. They created workshops within their homes that could function efficiently even during the darkest winter months. Medieval people understood that maintaining productivity during winter confinement was essential for both economic survival and mental health. They developed systems where families could continue essential work activities even when trapped indoors, creating goods that would sustain them economically when winter ended. These indoor activity systems also included entertainment and education arrangements that helped families maintain social bonds during long periods of isolation. They created spaces where stories could be told, songs could be sung, and children could be taught essential skills that would serve them throughout their lives. Let's examine something that reveals the true innovation of medieval winter survival. They developed early warning systems that could alert families to dangerous weather conditions before those conditions became deadly. Medieval communities that winter understood survival required more than just warm homes. It required the ability to predict and prepare for weather events that could trap families or destroy their carefully constructed survival systems. They developed techniques for reading weather signs that allowed them to prepare for dangerous conditions. These weren't just folk wisdom traditions. They were sophisticated observational systems based on generations of careful attention to weather patterns, animal behavior, and atmospheric conditions. Medieval people could predict storms, temperature drops, and other dangerous weather events with remarkable accuracy. They developed community communication systems that could alert entire villages to approaching dangerous weather. These systems allowed communities to share resources, coordinate survival efforts, and ensure that no family was left unprepared for potentially deadly conditions. The integration of weather prediction with home preparation reveals sophisticated emergency planning. Medieval families could adjust their heating systems, food preparation, and resource allocation based on predicted weather conditions, maximizing their chances of surviving unexpected winter emergencies. Medieval communities also developed mutual aid systems that activated during the most dangerous winter conditions. They understood that individual family survival was connected to community survival, so they created networks of support that could sustain entire villages through the worst winter conditions. These community survival networks included resource sharing agreements, emergency shelter arrangements, and coordinated heating systems that could support families whose individual survival systems failed during extreme weather events. The sophistication of these medieval winter survival systems reveals something profound about human adaptability and ingenuity. These weren't primitive people struggling against nature. They were skilled engineers, craftsmen, and planners who developed comprehensive systems for surviving conditions that would challenge even modern technology. Medieval winter survival required integration of multiple complex systems, from building construction and heating technology to food preservation and community planning. The success of these systems depended on deep understanding of physics, chemistry, biology, and social dynamics that allowed families and communities to thrive in conditions that could easily be deadly legacy of medieval winter survival techniques that can still be seen in traditional building methods and survival practices around the world. Many of the principles they developed remain valid today, proving that their innovations weren't just temporary solutions but fundamental insights into the relationship between human beings and harsh winter environments. What's truly remarkable is how medieval builders solved one of winter's most deadly problems: carbon monoxide poisoning. Without modern ventilation systems, they had to figure out how to burn fires safely indoors without killing their families with invisible, odorless gas. Their solution was so clever that modern engineers still study it today. Medieval chimney systems weren't just stone tubes that carried smoke outside. They were sophisticated air management networks that created controlled airflow patterns throughout entire homes. They understood that proper ventilation required more than just letting smoke escape. It required creating air circulation systems that could remove dangerous gases while preserving precious heat. They developed what we might call the first positive pressure ventilation systems. By carefully controlling the size and positioning of air intake points, they could create airflow patterns that pushed fresh air into living spaces while drawing contaminated air toward chimneys. These systems required precise calculations and patterns, temperature based on wind differences, and the physics of air movement. But here's where their ingenuity really shows. Medieval builders created secondary ventilation networks that operated independently of their main heating systems. Small air passages built into walls could provide fresh air circulation even when main fires were banked or extinguished. These passages often incorporated filters made from cloth or organic materials that could clean incoming air while preventing heat loss. Some medieval homes included what were essentially the first heat recovery ventilation systems. They built air passages that allowed incoming fresh air to pass near outgoing warm air, transferring heat from exhaust air to fresh air before it entered living spaces. This meant families could have fresh air without sacrificing the warmth they desperately needed to survive. The positioning of these ventilation systems reveals sophisticated understanding of indoor air quality management. Different rooms had different ventilation requirements based on their uses. Kitchens needed more air circulation to remove smoke and cooking odors. Sleeping areas needed gentler airflow that wouldn't create uncomfortable drafts. Storage areas needed controlled ventilation that could prevent moisture buildup without causing temperature fluctuations. Medieval people also developed techniques for monitoring indoor air quality, using methods that seem almost magical today. They used candle flames to detect dangerous gas accumulation. They observed how animals behaved to identify air quality problems before they became dangerous to humans. They even used plants and herbs that could indicate when indoor air needed refreshing. Now let's explore something that shows just how advanced medieval construction really was. They developed building techniques that could create structures capable of surviving not just winter cold, but the kind of extreme weather events that could destroy entire communities in a single night. Medieval builders understood that winter survival meant more than just staying warm. It meant creating structures that could withstand hurricane-force winds, massive snow loads, and rapid temperature changes that could crack inferior construction like eggshells. Their building techniques were designed for the kind of extreme weather that modern meteorologists classify as once-in-a-century events. The foundation systems they developed were engineering marvels that remain impressive today. They didn't just dig holes and pour concrete. They created foundation networks that could distribute structural loads across wide areas while preventing frost heave that could destroy buildings from the ground up. These foundations often extended below the frost line and incorporated drainage systems that prevented water accumulation that could freeze and crack structural elements. Medieval builders also understood wind loading in ways that wouldn't be formally recognized by engineering until much later. They positioned buildings and designed structural elements to deflect wind rather than resist it directly. They created architectural features that could redirect dangerous winds around and over structures rather than allowing wind forces to accumulate against walls and roofs. The roof systems they developed could support snow loads that would collapse modern residential construction. But they didn't achieve this through brute strength alone. They created structural systems that could distribute loads efficiently, while maintaining the flexibility needed to handle dynamic loading from wind and temperature changes. Medieval builders incorporated what we might call the first seismic engineering principles. even in regions where earthquakes were rare. They understood that buildings needed to flex and move with environmental forces rather than rigidly resisting them. This flexibility allowed medieval structures to survive extreme weather events that destroyed more rigid construction. Let's examine something that reveals the true sophistication of medieval resource management. They developed systems for managing fuel consumption that allowed families to survive entire winters with remarkably small amounts of combustible material. Medieval people couldn't just go to a store and buy heating fuel. They had to gather, process, and manage fuel supplies that would last for months of continuous use. This required sophisticated understanding of different fuel types, burning characteristics, and storage techniques that could preserve fuel quality throughout winter. They understood that different types of wood burned at different rates and temperatures. They carefully selected and seasoned wood to create fuel supplies that could provide maximum heat output with minimum consumption. Some families developed wood processing techniques that could increase the heat output of common wood types by 30% or more. Medieval fuel management also included techniques for creating what were essentially the first manufactured heating fuels. They developed methods for creating compressed fuel blocks from sawdust, organic waste, and binding agents. These manufactured fuels could burn longer and hotter than raw wood, while using materials that might otherwise be wasted. But the real innovation was in fuel conservation techniques that maximized heat output from minimal fuel consumption. They developed burning techniques that could extract every possible unit of heat from their fuel supplies. They created fire management systems that could maintain heating fires for hours using amounts of fuel that would seem impossible today. Medieval families also developed backup heating systems that could function when primary fuel supplies ran low. They created heating systems using alternative materials like dried dung, compressed straw, and even heated stones that could provide emergency warmth when wood supplies were exhausted. The integration of fuel management with food preparation reveals sophisticated multi-use planning. Medieval families coordinated cooking activities with heating needs, using cooking fires to heat their homes while preparing meals. This coordination required careful planning and timing that maximized fuel efficiency while meeting all family survival needs. Now let's explore something that shows the true complexity of medieval winter survival planning. They developed what we might call the first emergency preparedness systems designed to help families survive unexpected disasters that could destroy their carefully constructed survival systems. Medieval people understood that winter survival wasn't just about being prepared for normal winter conditions. It was about being ready for the kind of catastrophic events that could trap families for weeks, destroy heating off access to essential supply systems, or cut. They developed backup systems for their backup systems. Emergency shelter systems were built into medieval homes that could function even if main heating systems failed. These systems often included secondary heating sources that used different fuel types, backup food storage areas that were protected from main house disasters, and emergency water supplies that could sustain families during extended isolation periods. Medieval communities developed mutual aid networks that could activate during emergency conditions. These networks included resource-sharing agreements, emergency shelter arrangements, and coordinated response systems that could support families whose individual preparation systems were overwhelmed by extreme conditions. They also developed communication systems that could function during extreme weather when normal community interaction was impossible. These systems allowed isolated families to signal for help and allowed communities to coordinate emergency response efforts, even during the worst winter conditions. The sophistication of medieval emergency planning reveals deep understanding of risk management and disaster preparedness. They didn't just plan for likely scenarios, they planned for the kind of extreme events that could destroy entire communities if people weren't adequately prepared. Medieval families developed portable emergency kits that could sustain them if they were forced to abandon their homes during winter disasters. These kits included emergency food supplies, portable heating systems, and essential tools that could help families survive in temporary shelters until normal living conditions could be restored. The integration of emergency preparedness with normal winter survival systems reveals comprehensive planning that considered multiple failure modes and backup strategies. Medieval people understood that survival required redundancy and flexibility that could adapt to changing conditions and unexpected challenges. Let's examine something that might surprise you about medieval winter survival. They developed sophisticated health management systems that could maintain family health during months of confinement in conditions that could easily promote disease and injury. Medieval people understood that winter survival wasn't just about staying warm and fed. It was about maintaining physical and mental health during months of limited activity, restricted diet, and close confinement that could create conditions perfect for illness and injury. They developed comprehensive health management strategies that addressed both prevention and treatment of winter-related health problems. Tonight, as you return to your climate-controlled home with the flick of a switch, remember the ingenuity that came before. Medieval people didn't just survive winter, they conquered it through sheer human brilliance, turning stone and straw into fortress-like sanctuaries that could wrestle warmth from the coldest nights. Their legacy lives on in every heated floor, every insulated wall, every cozy corner where families gather against the cold. The next time winter bites, think of those medieval builders who proved that human creativity burns brighter than any fire.